Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where we strive to dig deeper and to bring analysis out to the people of policies and trends that will affect their lives and their children's lives and generations to come. Tonight, I want to deal specifically with the media, and I will start that in just a moment. First, I would encourage people, if you're listening to this later on YouTube, please check my website out down at which will be mentioned at the bottom, linked in the comment section. And also, if you like dystopian science fiction set in the ancient past of Earth, then check out my book at Amazon, The Destiny of Our Past, where I deal with a lot of the issues within a fictional narrative that we discuss here in reality. And speaking of reality, let's deal with that media that's out there. I know the idea of reality and mainstream media can seem like a contradictory term, where we are given narratives that just don't fit the reality. I used to actually encourage people, if I had an interview with the media, I would encourage them to actually watch and see what that interview was like, and then see how the media treated the interview later on, how it was presented. And they would always say the next day after the news aired, they would say, I was there. That's how they presented the interview or the event that you were hosting or something. That is not what happened. And I would say exactly. Because ultimately, they're the ones that tell the story. Now, speaking of, fiction, when you're a fictional writer, you have the ability to create a universe. You have the ability to use your imagination to its maximum degree in order to convey a message. And I would actually say that probably all, if not, maybe most fiction does convey a message. And the thing is that the power of the pen, I can't remember who said it, the power of the pen versus the power of the sword right offhand, but it is very, very powerful. And nowadays, what's powerful is the video. And you can edit a video, you can edit a speech, you can superimpose commentary over it. So I don't care who's speaking. I mean, you can do this to Kim Jong, you could do it to Vladimir Putin or Angela Merkel or Donald Trump or whatever. You can make the story say what you want it to say. Even if someone gives a speech, let's say they give a speech, they open up for questions and answers, and that speech lasts for maybe 30, 40 minutes. And then you find something in that speech. You can make the speech sound totally different. And, I saw this when it came to Trump and the statements that he made in reference to Charlottesville. He never once made a moral equivalency between any of the groups. He merely said there was violence on both sides. That would be like a historian getting up in front of a class and discussing bombing during, he could discuss Japan bombing Pearl Harbor, and then later say that the United States bombed Tokyo. And then someone could say, so both sides bombed someone, right? And killed people in the process. And then the professor says, well, yes, both sides employed attacking people who were innocent. And then someone could then say, this professor says that America was no better than Japan in its actions in World War II. And that's what the media, a lot of people in the media have done when it comes to Trump. Trump was trying to say that there was violence taking place, and you can look at the videos and see some violence and bad behavior from I don't know how many different groups there were representing all these different causes, but you see a lot of it. All right? And the problem we have is that I see that there is a movement to eradicate the First Amendment. No, I'm totally serious, because I talked about this last year when, the odds were at that time that Hillary was going to win the presidency. And I said, I think I quoted, Julian Assange in this, that there were forces out there wanting to get rid of the open society that we were all taught in social studies class is a hallmark of the United States. And conversely, free countries, for instance, in Europe. And then take a look at what's going on now. You see this sense that maybe we should start imposing limits on if people can come and protest. So maybe a politician says, we're going to remove this statue. And then people say, well, we're going to come and protest removing that statue. And then people who are from the left will say, well, we're going to show up and counter-protest this event, and we're going to bring a rumble with us or whatever. I mean, they're hinting that things are going to happen. So let's say said politician decides, you know what, let's just say we're going to ban demonstrations for a certain amount of period. Well, that means no one can show disapproval of what this politician has decided to do. I don't think any of these communities there's actually been votes. And it would be really nice if they would have votes. Let the people decide. If the people in a community want a Robert E. Lee statue up, then let them keep it. If a people don't want it up, then I guess it's time to obey the wishes of the masses and remove it. If people, let's say in the future, more and more people move into Salt Lake City who, don't identify as being Mormon, and they demand that the statues that are all over Salt Lake of Brigham Young or Joseph Smith or whatever be removed from any kind of public property. Well, I guess you would have to go by what the voters were saying. So what irks me is when a politician just decides to do something, but what really irks me is that we're seeing this sense of the media actually coming out and saying, well, maybe we need to curtail speech. Don't give any permits to anyone. Which means, again, no one gets to protest for or against. This sets a really bad precedent, because then you start saying that people need to watch what they say because it might cause trouble. And then we're going into the thing that even Barack Obama warned us against on college campuses. Yes, it's true. Look it up on YouTube. Barack Obama came out and said that we need to uphold freedom of speech. And we need people not to be so sensitive that they don't want someone who disagrees with them to come and speak on campus. Because campus is where you get ideas challenged. And that's part of education. So ultimately, he's right. And there's been famous comedians who've said, you know what, we can't perform on campuses anymore because our jokes, even though they're not meant to be offensive, and maybe 20 years ago, no one would have found them offensive. Now, a few people complain and say, well, you're you're this or that or whatever. And then the campus administrator's like, oh, well, no. This is too controversial. We got to just say no to this. So essentially what you're doing is you're getting rid of everybody's ability to hear either what they want to hear or what they don't want to hear. It also gets rid of people's ability to challenge it, to come to the event, raise your hand, go up and ask this person if it's a political speech, how they justify their stance. Be they liberal, be they conservative. If we start eradicating this, and sad thing is, I've seen some polls that show the majority of millennials, or at least a very large segment, would feel that it's more important to preserve people's feelings than to preserve the First Amendment. But the problem is, if you don't have the First Amendment, you no longer have any other guarantees that are in the First Amendment. And that's not just speech. Then we start talking religion. Then we start talking the press and the right of the people peaceably to assemble. And then if we don't have that right, you might as well just forget about the rest of the rights, because governments are going to do things. And normally we have those checks on them, because we can then, say, well, this is going to show up on the news, and man, people are going to be really angry if the police, for instance, do something really questionable. Well, the problem is, if you've already imposed limits on the First Amendment, then you can't expose it, which means the cops can then begin to violate the Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and so on and so on. It's like a domino. Knock down the First Amendment, all the rest of them go to. And then the Constitution is nothing more than a piece of garbage. I was told by a European recently. He made a comment to me. He said, you know what? You Americans put too much stock in the Constitution. Things change over time, and you have to recognize that. And, of course, he's not used to the traditions in America. But he's thinking maybe there's too much freedom to do this or that. And, it's one thing if a European feels this way, because they're not affecting us. Or are they? I'll say this. There's a lot of people. I've talked to people that administer websites, web forums and stuff. And they get to see where people are coming from and making comments in their debate forums. And they'll often say, oh, there's a lot of people from, for instance, Scandinavia and Britain who come in and discuss American politics. And many times you don't know that they're Scandinavian. Scandinavians, by the way, Norway, for instance, those countries, their English is really good because they're required to learn English from practically, I think, first grade. And then, of course, all the movies and stuff, that are imported are in English. So you don't know, these people. You can have people saying, I think it's time we get rid of the freedom to own guns. Well, they don't really experience the freedom to own guns anyway, because they're maybe arguing with you from Edinburgh, Scotland. But you don't know they're from Edinburgh, Scotland. That's the way the internet works, but that's just the way it is. And so keep that in mind. Europeans and others come in and they make commentary on websites here in America, and probably Facebook and all, the social media. But the problem is they influence people here, but also there are liberals here in America. And it's ironic because liberals used to support total freedom of speech. But you know what? That generation's passing on. These were the baby boom and the people before them. The liberals who were like, you know what? I want to hear any group whatsoever. Because they knew, because they'd experienced that the people with their political viewpoints in the 50s were crushed by the powers that be. There was a lot of stuff the U.S. government did to make sure that people that were in any way, shape, or form really to the left were in some way destroyed in their abilities to be able to speak. And so many of them were willing to let anyone speak so that everyone could have a say and everyone could have influence in the society. That has changed with the new generation of liberals, the more pragmatic ones, because once liberals became more the dominant force, and you have to admit, to a large degree, the culture war has been won by the left. Of course, there's a big insurgency, so to speak, from the right on a variety of issues still. But the left are the ones who have the most power and influence. They control the media, for the most part, and entertainment, and much of academia, higher education. I'm sure you find way more Republicans that teach at your local high school than you'll find Republicans teaching at your local university, if it's a state university or a liberal private university. The thing is, now there's a tendency, since the left knows that they have most of the avenues of communication, that maybe when people start poking out, when those insurgents from the right start poking their heads up and they start making commentary on the internet and, in protest and movements and stuff like this in social media, then these younger liberals start thinking maybe what we should do is put up roadblocks so that they can't communicate. If they're tech companies, they start thinking, what kind of algorithms can we put in where when you search a particular term, let's say it's, I don't know, I'm just throwing this out here, global warming, that most of your first hits, whatever the search engine is or the social media, will be those that take a more liberal stand. Let's make sure that if I post something in one of the various social medias, that if it's more conservative, then maybe it doesn't reach as many of the people that are in your network. And so therefore it makes it look as if there's not as much support. This is something that is very worrisome. Again, the internet has opened things up. Now, of course, it's a Wild West. People get to give their opinions on anything. But at the same time, that's what I believe the founding fathers who founded the United States were shooting for. They had the idea, of course, in those days, that was, people would speak in church, people would speak on, in the marketplace, put up papers, on fence posts and buildings, talking about an idea. It wasn't as widespread as it is now, where you can go on, I was talking to someone recently. She has 5,000 people in her Facebook network. And that doesn't include how many people follow her. So that gives her, a person who's not even old enough to vote, that gives her a lot of power to persuade people. But you also talk to people who have, let's say, 5,000 people, and it doesn't reach 5,000. When they post something, it only reaches the people they have a strong interconnection with, for the most part. And I've talked to entertainers and so forth in the same way. But what if we go further? What if we get algorithms in the future in which you post something and only the people that totally support your stand are able to see your viewpoint? Then we wind up with echo chambers. We wind up with conservatives of a certain type only hear what other conservatives of a certain type are saying. Liberal conservatives that are more maybe moderate in some areas and conservative in others, they only hear from the people who are the moderate or the conservative. Liberals hear, if they're kind of just a general mainstream liberal, they hear liberals, and if you're far left liberal, you only hear what your friends who find those viewpoints or followers or whatever believe. What if we have that in the future? Or what if we have to have internet IDs? You know, some countries are proposing those. And then you post something the government doesn't like, and there's even democratic countries that have talked about this in Europe. You post something that the government doesn't like, well, you might have your privileges taken down of being able to go on the internet at all. This is all technologically possible to do. So we are entering an era where I think a lot of stuff is troublesome. A lot of our assumptions about freedom and speech are being challenged. And think about what this means, though. I was thinking about this. Many people on the far left, again, this is a small percentage, ultimately, I think, of liberals, but it's still a very vocal and powerful entity. Many people equate, for instance, I don't know, the Christian religion with in and of itself being racist or sexist or whatever ist that you can come up with. And an increasing number feel the same way towards Jews and Israel. And the problem there is, what if all this gets extended a little bit further to where we start saying that we need to remove names of communities that are named, for instance, Corpus Christi, Texas. That means the body of Christ. Okay? There's a lot of names out there that are biblical, that are on cities, streets, and so forth. And there's monuments that could be argued to be somewhat religious. Come on, Salt Lake, if you got a monument of Brigham Young, yes, he was the first governor, but of course he was also part of a religion. And there's places in California where there are missions that, you know, you could say, well, should this be publicly supported? I'm not sure which ones, but there are statues, there are commemorations that, while there may be a certain secular aspect to them, they still have a religious aspect as well. And maybe they'll be taken down. Maybe the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty is ultimately it could be construed as being a religious symbol because it's patterned after the goddesses and gods in antiquity sometimes just take on different forms when the other culture adopts those traditions. So it could be argued that the Statue of Liberty is actually a representation of Ishtar or Inanna from the Sumerian pantheon of gods. So, I will note, Egypt said no to the Statue of Liberty being sent there, which it was originally intended to go. You could make a statement that the Statue of Liberty is in some way violating church and state. California, the flag has Minerva on it, a Roman goddess. You have all kinds of things that people could start challenging. Hey, look at Mount Rushmore. 2 of the people on Mount Rushmore were slave owners. One of them was willing to keep the Union together by allowing slavery to continue. And the other one's Teddy Roosevelt. Of course, you can say Teddy was someone who, while he's a hero of progressives, he still was quite militaristic. Oh, and he supported eugenics. He was a huge supporter of eugenics, which, leftists say, well, we're all equal. We're all born equal. You can't say that this person has stronger genetic endowment than this person. So there goes Teddy too. I don't know who we put up there. Maybe the Teletubbies. Weren't there 4 Teletubbies? We could put them up on Mount Rushmore instead. Do a little alteration and, sandblast this and that, add a few things, and we have the Teletubbies. On Mount Rushmore. We have the Washington Monument. Again, you could make a statement that the spire represents the obelisk represents part of Osiris's body that his mother was not in the godhood of Egypt. She couldn't find that part when she was putting him back together after Set had dismembered him. Bring him back to life. So the obelisk represents that part. But again, it's a religious thing. It comes out of Egypt. Someone could say it's cultural appropriation. You're taking an aspect of Egyptian culture and using it in America. And and on top of that, Washington was a slave owner. Maybe we need to take that down. Or you could change the name. Or you could take down the Jefferson Memorial. There are some people that have talked about we should get rid of the Lincoln Memorial because he made some statements that would be very politically incorrect nowadays. Okay? So the thing is that we could argue every single historical figure. Darwin, by today's standards, he was very racist. Read his book. Well, just read the front cover of Origin of the Species. Or read his book, Descent of Man. That's probably why Darwin's not taught, really that much in universities anymore. You still teach, evolution, but you don't talk about Darwin so much. And, that's one interesting aspect of modern day humanism. Secular humanism is the idea that you take the ideals and positive aspects of religion, but you throw the god or gods out. And ultimately, I'm not quite sure that such a stand could actually continue. If you erase God from everything, and then people start interpreting things based on some other criteria, let's say you become very scientific, then you open up the doors to a lot of very interesting scenarios for society. You may wind up with a eugenically based society, a society that genetics means everything, like Gattaca, the movie Gattaca. And religion would kind of stand up to that and say, no, you can't do that. I mean, this is going against human dignity and the creation and so forth. Well, if you get rid of religion, then you could do anything. Because you may think, well, I have ethics. There's no way I would support this. Well, someone else says, you know what? Prove your ethics exist. Well, then it just turns into your opinion. And without some sort of course, someone could say that about religion too, but there's usually a little bit stronger foundation there. But if you get rid of religion, then it's just your opinion versus my opinion, and then if you're a pragmatic society, you may decide, well, this is what we need to do. And no one can argue against it. Now, the other aspects to this whole thing, when it comes to assembly, is, and this is really bothering me, the media is not pointing out very much about what's going on with the violence at these rallies. You have situations in which I've been reading this, and there's been at the left-wingers have been accused of throwing balloons full of urine or bags of human feces at people they don't like, at these protests. And are they trying to push it to the point that you wind up with either a crackdown by the police, so then it turns into kind of a civil war. Maybe the police finally get pushed to the limit and they shoot a couple protesters. Now you've got martyrs. And then, you get this riled up frenzy. And then pretty soon you start seeing violence in the streets, where no one's going to show up for a political rally because they might figure that they might die. They might get shot. They might get some other horrible thing done to them. And this is troublesome because, again, this is what happened before Nazi Germany. You had something like, I can't remember what it was, 35 or 36 political parties that were vying for power. And often they'd get in street brawls with each other. And this, was causing problems. And then what happens? People start going, you know what, I want a solution to this. Sure, get rid of protests. Crack down. Send the police in. Round up these people causing trouble. Well, if you do this, then you actually wind up with a system you don't want. You wind up with a fascist system. I can guarantee you there's no conservatives that want fascism. And I think most liberals do not want fascism either. Our forefathers who fought in World War II fought fascism. But the irony is nowadays the left would look at these soldiers and they would say, these soldiers are all fascist. Have you talked to them? They believe this and this and this and this and this. The generation of the 40s, according to the left today, would be fascist. And I'm worried that maybe the Democrats, when they start making comments that sound like they're saying that all the people who are out there who don't agree with them are fascist, and of course it's only a step away from accusing them of being Nazistic. This is worrisome because if they're starting to view people like this, and let's say the Democrats won the election next time. Let's say they're in the presidency. And they have become converted to this idea that all the people that voted against them are fascist, Nazi, extremist, which is not the case. Okay? I really resent anyone saying that a conservative is fascist. I think it's really ironic when I know people that are Jewish or non-white who get called fascist, by the left. A friend of mine in college was Jewish, and he just started talking to this one peace activist about economics. And this peace activist grabbed him by the throat and started strangling him. He backed off because there was people around. But this person that was a peace activist could not control his impulses. And he went after this person. And think about what happens. Maybe, I don't know whatever happened to that peace activist. He might be a Democratic senator right now or congressman. And if they have this idea that if you're no longer the loyal opposition, but you're the evil opposition, that's when you're going to see rights curtailed. That's when you're going to see no more permits issued if a person, let's say, wants to have a pro-gun rally. That would be considered inappropriate. Then it turns into maybe a crackdown on school curriculum across America. You get an idea that maybe we need a new sense of common core. We need to start teaching the fact that, they would put it as fact, that Republicans are founded on racism and sexism and homophobia and all these other things. And you know what? Young people will start, that's what they're exposed to. They might start believing it. And then they're starting to think, we don't want those people out there demonstrating, even if it happens to be their parents, because maybe they're starting to go, oh my gosh, my parents, they voted for the Republicans. So I got to make sure that I don't grow up to be like them. So I'll support these policies to make sure that doesn't happen. And then you get into the idea that culturally you start changing, I've heard that there's been calls that history curriculums in one particular state should include as fact that the Russians were involved in the U.S. elections to get Donald Trump elected. And, if you read that in a history book, then it becomes true. Remember, Napoleon said history is agreed upon fiction. Well, if everyone agrees upon it, it becomes a truth. And this is a very dangerous situation. And I don't think most people really understand the gravity of it. Conservatives don't understand the gravity of it. They think, most conservatives are like, okay, well, these guys really irritate me, but, I've got a job to do, I've got to work, I've got to make a living, I've got to raise my kids. Well, that's fair enough. But if you don't take attention onto this and try to address it, and maybe even try to convert some people over to your side, then you're going to lose. Think of it. I don't know what the statistics are for how many old people voted for the Republicans, and I mean this in reference to congressmen, senators, presidency. It doesn't matter. I don't know what the ratio was of elderly people who voted Republican and Democrat. I remember during the primaries that, at least amongst Democrats, that Hillary, her biggest supporters were elderly white women and gay men. This was the groups that were really behind her. Now, I do know there's probably, because I see pictures, people posting of their, let's say their father, who looks like he's elderly and maybe fought in the Korean War, and he's got a Donald Trump hat on, and, during his birthday, and he's got the thumbs up. But now think about this. There's going to be some Trump supporters who are going to die of old age. Okay? It's just going to happen. Are Republicans replacing themselves? Are they really replacing themselves? Now, there's two ways you can replace yourself. One is biologically, and most kids do maintain the values of their parents when they grow up. The other is through conversion of people. Hillary, for instance, Hillary Clinton was a Republican when she was younger. She worked for Barry Goldwater. She had conservative stands. There's a long history about this, but when she was in college, I guess she changed those stands, and she maintained those liberal stands. Now think about this. What are you doing right now to counter the liberal media? Are you teaching people correct principles? Are you showing them what really is happening, what the consequences are if such and such policy goes through? Are you trying to warn people in that respect? If you are not, then you are in danger of, losing people, and that little narrow ability that Trump had of winning, or of many congressmen and senators who may be on very marginal districts when it comes to the ratio of Democrat voters to Republican, you run the risk that just enough people die that that the other side has a majority. If nothing else, maybe when they die, they get signed up as being Democrats afterwards. But the thing is that you need to make sure that you're not just sitting on information. And even though you may feel like, well, if I share this, no one's going to listen, you don't know that. There's things that get shared that suddenly, impact on someone. Now, you're not going to switch a liberal, a committed liberal, to conservative overnight. But I have seen committed liberals who have become conservative over time because they start evaluating economics and social policy. And once they evaluate those things, they start questioning the assumptions, and idealistic assumptions at that, of when they were young. And so information can be very, very important. You need to share these things. You need to be more of an activist. At the same time, there's probably a percentage of people out there who may support your political stance, but just barely. You need to reinforce them so they don't get swept up in the whole media frenzy and become the other side. So my suggestion overall would be to become more politically active. Of course, if you're young, I would say have more kids. But if you're older, become more politically active. If you're in social media, join groups where you can discuss issues. If nothing else, it'll keep you sharp. Helps ward off all the effects of aging. If you're older, if you're really old. Of course, my kids, they think that old means anyone over 30, it's pretty much ready to grab a walker and go down the street. But use the influence you have. Because, like I said earlier, the internet is a great equalizer. You can go on, you can convert people, you can get people to listen. Whereas maybe, in the old days, you were maybe only able to send a letter to the editor of the newspaper, and, they had a limit of one or two, one per month or one every 2 months. And that's only if the editor liked your letter to the editor. Okay? But make no mistake about it, there really is a culture war taking place right now, and the left is winning. And you could say they've already won. They control the big cities. They don't control the countryside, but now they're coming for the countryside. You think that these politicians in small towns where they're suddenly saying, that statue that's out in front of the courthouse, it's been there for like 100 to 150 years, that needs to come down. But they're not asking the voters for it. Where do you think that message is coming from? You think it's maybe coming from big cities? You think maybe politicians and political think tanks and wealthy financiers that work with these kinds of organizations are not saying, you know what, we're gonna do this now, and we're going to gain political points. One is you start getting people to question their heritage. Two is you change the narrative. All of a sudden, now any mention of the Confederacy, and you may as well be a Nazi in much of the main media. And I just remember a few years ago, it was quite common to have movies and TV dramas in which you presented Confederate soldiers in a good light. You look at the movie Gettysburg. It doesn't present the Confederates as evil Nazi-type people. It presents them as, honorable human beings who happened to be on the other side when it came to the Civil War. But that's changing. And I think what you're going to wind up with is maybe if things aren't stopped at this point and people don't show that, we pretty much healed over the Civil War a long time ago, but now the old wounds are being torn open again. You may wind up in a situation in which, you're going to have a movie that's going to feature the South, and these guys are going to come in, the Confederate soldiers will be goose-stepping down the streets of, Atlanta or something like this. And, maybe they'll switch the Confederate flag to the Confederate battle flag, I will say. They'll switch it to like a Nazi flag. And you know what? this knowledge that people have of history nowadays, they probably think Hitler got the swastika from the Southerners. I'll bet you if you went out on the street, like one of those Mark Dice interviews, if you were to go out there on the streets and start asking people, what do you think about removing the Nazi flags that the Confederates used during the Civil War? That you'd probably get a lot of people say, oh yeah, that was terrible. And you can even ask them, like, well, you are aware, they used the Nazi flag. They're the ones that came up with the idea. And people would be like nodding their heads like, yeah, that's true. Because historically, we are an illiterate nation. Okay, I don't know whether it's by design or whether it's just happened because people have so many other things that they're interested in. So history becomes what was on TV 5 years ago. That's their ancient history. And their studying history is to watch a rerun of that show. That is a very dangerous place to be because the Founding Fathers said that you had to have an informed, moral, committed population to maintain the Republic. John F. Kennedy said that the weakest link, the weakest point of a chain is the link of an uninformed voter. So we need education. We need people to understand all sides of issues. We need people to understand analysis. People don't understand analysis anymore. I mean, seriously. Oh my gosh. Their idea is, here's this side, my side, and here's the stupid side. They can't walk in another person's shoes anymore. We don't have that really pushed in school anymore. In an age of testing, maybe it is the Common Core or whatever, to where we just want to give facts instead of trying to figure out why, who, where, when, and these kinds of things. We just want to know what happened without context. And this can lead to problems. All right? This can lead to people filling in the gaps. Pick up a history book that if you have a son or daughter or a grandson or granddaughter that's taking history and they have their book at the house this year when school starts, take a look at it and see if you agree with how things are put forth. Now, I know that there's people that are on the left side, as well as the right, who gripe that Americans are historically illiterate. But it doesn't help anything when it comes to information and the voters if they don't know. I enjoy having a conversation and a debate with someone that has a different political viewpoint than me, only if they bring up facts that challenge my facts. Not if they suddenly start screaming and saying, screaming insults and assuming that since I don't agree with them, that I'm stupid. And this kind of country we're heading for, where everyone gets their education by watching little memes and political messages that are put out by a variety of even left-wing non-American. There's some of those not memes, but those little videos you see on social media are produced by countries in the Middle East that have media outlets. And they're ripping on America for not having more liberal policies. And that makes me wonder, are they doing this just to undermine America? I can't believe that they're doing this to promote liberal policies. Not if they're saying, hey, look, it's wonderful that such and such country has now liberalized their abortion laws. And then you look at their country and, the ones that sponsor it, and you find out that a woman who has an abortion is subject to a long prison sentence. And then you're starting to think, well, maybe this is to make the population weaker, to where they adopt policies that won't lead to marriage and family and stuff, and maybe someday their political sides can take over. I mean, I just don't understand it, but there's a lot of this kind of propaganda stuff out there. I hate going through social media now, and you hit these videos, and I hate the conservative ones too. Okay? I don't like the video things because they all are propaganda ultimately. They show very quick, colorful imagery with a simple message that's supposed to stick in the mind of the person looking at it in their social media. And they know the attention span of someone on social media is about 2 seconds max. So they have to get you quick. If they can hold you just for a few seconds, so you get the first couple aspects of the message, they've won. And this is not exactly the kind of world that I think we really want to get into, where it sounds like Idiocracy. Well, in Idiocracy, they didn't even have memes. But the idea being that we have very low information voters, because then they're easily swayed, because then you can, just say something like, did you know so-and-so supports this? And that must mean that they're bad people. And everyone's going, they're bad people. Do we want to live in such a zombified system? If you don't, you need to act now. Okay? I even see some conservative media out there that's just turning into, well, the story is just a series of Twitter posts. Is that analysis? No. I mean, we're going to get to the point that we're going to be, it's going to seem like it's, chimpanzees, that are just, screaming at each other to make a point. I mean, remember 1984, where the message that's being presented is that language is being curtailed and shrunk so that it's going to be impossible really to communicate with one another in the future. Okay? Maybe Orwell knew more than he was letting on, because he used to be part of the left. And then he turned on it. And his works are a way of questioning, the left. Of course, it could also be used for the far right, too. All right? But ultimately, I think the average American, who the media seems to think, and certainly these violent protesters are absolutely convinced of, these people, they're convinced that they're Nazis and fascists and that sort of thing, who really aren't. They're just regular Americans who most of the time don't care how you're living as long as you don't impose it on them. They don't care what your religion is or lack of religion. They don't care about what your preferences on anything is all about. They just want to live and let live. Now, of course, if they're a member of a church, they may still invite you to church and stuff, but they're not wrapping you up in a cocoon and dragging you by your heels to church to force you to become religious. So this is something we really need to examine and take special care to counter. That the normal, regular American people are being branded. They're being made what they aren't. And when you brand someone and you make them into an evil entity, a TV villain, what do you do to TV villains in the TV show? You know what the fate is usually of villains in TV shows. So you better think really carefully about the direction the country is going to go. Is it going to remain a place where people can debate ideas, where the left and the right can fight it out using words and being able to enjoy freedom of speech to convey those words? Or is it going to be a country in which there's a crackdown, where you have the government coming out and saying, you know what, things are getting out of hand, we've got to stop this now. And then you may wind up, you may wind up really appreciating that U.S. Constitution that used to exist. Okay, because the Constitution's as powerful as what's called fiat currency. It's only good as long as people believe in it. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper. And so you got to make sure people continue to reverence it and see it as a good guidepost. Because you could change people in just, I think, a couple years. You could get people to think the Constitution is a bad thing. And maybe this is what the direction is. The media is going to start saying, you know what, freedom of speech and assembly and all these other rights, they're bad. Because they're holding America back from being a nice country where everyone's loving and caring and safe. And, of course, they'll distort the message to say that the only thing you need to do is get rid of this Constitution. And all it takes is just, the powers that be and enough of the people that agree with them that pretty soon we start phasing that out. And maybe adopting some other thing, like perhaps the UN Charter, or maybe the EU Charter, or, there's always North Korea's Constitution. I've read that one. That's really interesting. But ultimately, I don't think you want a system that's based on pragmatism, and it's based on whatever serves the community should come first before what serves the rights of the individual. Because that's a society that really is fascist. Anyway, we're just about out of time here, so thanks for tuning in, and I hope you'll be back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Take care.